Hello everybody, welcome to our second live teaching for the Festive Sock Along. Apologies for the little bit of a delay there, just making sure that everything is set up here for this evening. So what we're going to do is, do say hello by the way if you're joining me live or if you have any questions. I'm going to start, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to read a chart actually, just in case people haven't seen. So what I'm using this evening is I have the second part of the pattern, which you will hopefully have. It's in the files. So hopefully I'm going to show you how to read a chart for people who haven't read a chart before. I'm then going to show you how to do some really basic colour work. I'm going to show you how to use one hand. So I'm going to show you how to do it with your right hand. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but we're going to do it really slowly and really easily because it's nice to start colour work, standard colour work really straightforwardly. And then I'm going to show you how to do a Latvian braid, and I'm very excited to be doing that. It's going to be a little bit slow because I've cast on loads of stitches to do it, because I'm going to show you the full Latvian braid experience all the way around, so from the twisting of the yarn to the untwisting. So it's going to take a little while. I'm hoping not more than an hour though, so don't worry. And if you do need to drop off, don't worry, like this will be available afterwards. Hi everybody. Oh, hi Fiona, Susan, Heidi, Helen, Louisa and Tracy. Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to see that people are here with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to switch over, and as I did last night, I'm going to switch over my cameras via something else so that all the fiddling around isn't quite as obvious. And I'm going to show you how to read a chart, and then we're going to go from there. So I'm going to swap over now, and I will be back to you in about 2 minutes. Hi Margaret. Okay, so here we are. So we are now on to the second piece of the pattern. So this is the modified version of it. So this slots in here. So that goes into the leg part of the pattern. So we will be going back to the heel once we've finished with this bit. So you have here the modified leg piece. And what we're doing here is we're going to do this slightly reversed. I'm going to show you how to do the colour first, and then we'll do the Latvian braid. Just because in order to do the Latvian braid, you do need to have seen how to do colour work first. So we're going to do that very slowly. We're going to do it now. So I'm going to close these off. The first thing though, in case you haven't seen one before, is this is a colour work chart. So colour work charts they can be knit flat, so back and forward, or they can be knit in the round. One thing that tells you if a chart is knit in the flat or in the round is the numbers on the side. So because we're knitting in the round, all the numbers are on the right hand side of the chart. The chart is read from the bottom, so as you begin to knit it out, as it appears in your knitting, so this kind of, if you imagine this bringing itself up into your knitting like that, that's how it's read. So they're read from here. So we start on the right hand side and we go to the left. If we were doing it flat, we would go from right to left, and then left to right, and then right to left. But because we're going in the round all the time, we go from the right all the time, which is why the numbers are all on one side. So that's a difference that you'll see when a chart is worked flat or in the round. Sometimes you'll see, sometimes the designers will leave out these numbers for ease as well. Do check which way you should be knitting it then, because that could be a bit of an aesthetic thing rather than anything else. So we are going to start with this. The way to read a chart then is based on the key. So in this one I'm using main colour, so in this case it's going to be my brown, and my contrast colour, which is the white. You can see lots of different colours in a chart, but basically you're following these. It means that this stitch will be green, the next stitch will be white, and then this is the repeat. Sometimes the repeats will be marked in red, and it means that I do this pattern all the way around my round. And it would be the same if it was a row, so you would do that over and over again. And then you knit one row all the way up along to the end of it. It'll tell you how many times you should do that. So you would just say, maybe if it says repeat the whole chart once, it would mean that you would do this around all of those rows around the rounds the whole way. If it said to do 2 repeats, you would go the whole way up the chart twice. So that's just a little teeny tiny bit of basic chart reading, just in case people aren't familiar with it, because I know that not everybody has used a colour work chart before. A little tip for reading it is if you might have a post-it note. I'm afraid I only have heart-shaped post-it notes. You can cover them, and what I do is I will bring it up along as I follow my chart, so that I just reveal what I've done and what I'm supposed to do in my current round. Some people like to read them from below, but I like to do them from above if I'm hiding my pattern, because it means I can see what I've done and what I'm doing, but I'm not confused by what's ahead of me. It's just a tiny little chart reading tip. You can also just cross them out as you go as well, depending on how you like to how your pattern is, etc. So that's just a small tiny bit of pattern reading. And now with that in mind, I'm going to show you how to do a whole round of colourwork stranding. So we're not going to do too much detail about this because colourwork is like, there's a lot of teaching in it. So I'm going to show you how to do it with my right hand, and I'm going to show you just the basic movement of it. Again, I've started my round already, so I'm going to rip out one stitch because actually I'm going to use my brown as my green because it's easier. So that's fine. My first stitch then is that green stitch. So the next stitch I'm going to need to knit is my white stitch. So the first thing is that when you're doing colourwork, you join in your yarn. The first time you use it, you join it in like we did yesterday, and we just join in this yarn. So I'm going to just join it in just very like I did last night. I'm going to insert my needle, I'm going to put my tail down at the back of the work and just knit my stitch, and then I'm going to just do that with it. That's it, I've knit my stitch. So I now have my white yarn and my brown yarn. Now there's a lot of theory and talk about dominance in colourwork, but I'm not going to cover that because it's a bit confusing. So when you're working with two colours, the only thing you really need to remember with colourwork is that you want to keep one above and one below. So you decide at the start of your project, my brown yarn is going to go above, and I'll show you what this means in a minute, and my bottom yarn is going to go, my white yarn is going to go below. I then place my yarns like this. So this is my below yarn and this is my above yarn. So you keep them separate, and you're above and you're below. You're above and you're below. That's all you have to think about when you're doing colourwork. So I've connected my yarn, and I'm now going to be working a brown, a white, a brown, a white, a brown. So I take my yarn that's going to go above and I get it ready to work. Now there are lots of ways of holding your yarn properly, but we're not going to do this because like we just want to get people started if this is your first time doing this. So I insert my needle to knit, I take my yarn around and I knit with it. And what I'm going to show you with this is that has gone along the back of my yarn. It's called a strand or a float. So you'll see that as a strand or a float of yarn. And what you want to make sure with those is that they're not very tight. So you want to leave enough yarn so that it goes comfortably behind the back of your stitch. So you'll know if you're too tight. If you pull it in like that, it'll cause your yarn to pinch in really tightly. And that's what you want to avoid. It's better to be a little bit loose, particularly on a decorative sock like this, than it is to be too tight. So I'm going to take that back out, and then I'm going to very gently insert the tip of my needle, take my yarn again, go around my stitch, and I'm going to pull it out. I'm not going to pull it too tightly, I'm just going to leave it alone. Now, I'm going to put it down, and then I'm going to take my other yarn. It's below, so this is above and this is below. I'm then going to do the exact same, and I'm going to knit my stitch with it. And then you'll see this, it's below, so this was above. Come up a little bit closer so you can kind of see it. This is my strand above, this is my strand below, and you can see that the strand, it's much easier to see the white one actually just goes behind the brown stitch that I've done as well. And again, you'll see it's not too tight. Don't pull it too tightly again, so that's just uncomfortable, and what that does is it causes your yarn to pinch. So you can loosen it out a little bit, and just enough, kind of gently cover the back of it. That's all you're doing. You're not trying to pull it too tightly. And if you find yourself when you're practicing, if you're using one hand, so a lot of us will knit by rote, just practice taking the yarn around just enough, bringing it through, and don't pull it. So that's I've gone above, and now I'm going to go below. And I'm going to put it back down, then I'm going to take my yarn above, I'm going to go in. And another thing to do as well is that if you're worried about being too tight and bunched up, just spread your stitches a little bit down your needle so that they're nice and evenly spread as if your garment was laying flat. Don't have them all bunched up here, because what that does is it pulls the knitting tight. What you want to do is nice and smooth on your right hand needle, insert your needle to knit, and then knit. And what that does, by making sure that your stitches are well spread out, means that you have to reach a little bit with your yarn. So that is the first thing about working a stranded colourwork. And this is actually as well, this is the first round of your Latvian braid. So this is actually how you start a Latvian braid as well. If you were doing more colours, so say for example I had a longer part of brown, I would just keep knitting. So I would knit, then I would spread it out a little bit before I pick up my white. And because my white is below, I would then put in my needle to knit, spread it a little bit more, then reach around and knit my stitch. And you'll see that that has stranded a little bit further along the back of the work. Now there's lots of things about catching these floats, etc. But because the pattern is only a 1, 2, 1, 2 little piece here, it doesn't make any difference. Because there's no long floats in this because they're every second one, and this is a plain round, and then there's plain rounds as well, but there's nowhere where you're reaching too far across the backs of stitches. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to very slowly knit. I'm going to knit the whole round because this is knitting, and demonstrating knitting live is a little bit slow. So if anybody does have any questions while you watch me do this, I'm going to talk through it. So I'm going to keep going above and below. And the above and below is it's called color dominance, and it's a funny thing in that some people don't believe that it exists and some people believe that it does. It's how the colors pop when you're knitting with them. And my view is that if you can make a difference between them by carrying them above and below, then it exists. So what you'll see, does anyone have any questions about the stranded color work? Amy, I can see your question about the decreasing in this toe. That is definitely something we're going to talk about. So for the toe on this, to make it lie correctly against a fireplace or a wall, the toe is put on slightly differently to how you would put this on a main sock. We'll definitely show you that when we come to the toe lesson, because it's something to bear in mind, that the toe on the sock is a decorative toe, for sure. Now, just in case people are wondering about the way I'm moving the yarns up and down, it doesn't make a huge difference if you have them not above and below. I'm really showing you that because it's just it is a more correct way of doing it. If you bring them up from below all the time and you kind of wrap them, it doesn't make a huge difference. One of the great advantages of this though is that you will see that my yarns are not tangling at all, while keeping my dominance correct as well. So having one above and then one below, and this is very loose because I want to demonstrate it very loosely. It just means that the yarns don't twist. So we can keep going like that, and we're almost all the way around. So how do I know which to repeat? Yeah, so Helen, the way I know it's a 1-2 repeat is because of the chart. So in this is my brown. I know it's green in the thing we're using, which can be confusing. So this is how I know it's a 1 by 1. So this is my first stitch, my second stitch, and then with a chart, if you're only given 2 stitches and you have 60 stitches in your round, you keep repeating the 2 stitches all the way around, and that's how a chart works. So that's how I know in this case. Now there'll be some times when you get a much bigger chart, so you might actually see the repeats a little bit more obviously. Like somebody might put in 30 stitches and just keep doing the colors all the way around. But in this is just a small little narrow chart that goes across your 60 stitches, and it goes 30 times. So you will do this, you'll do green, well, brown, cream, brown, cream, brown, cream, 30 times. So yeah, it's a part of, that's how I know which is which. So say for example in the next round, if I was following this chart, I would just knit all white stitches. So it's just, it marks out the 2 stitches for me, and then I know how to keep going. Let me see, actually for tomorrow night what I'll do is I'll bring a bigger chart, and I'll show you the difference between what you would expect to see on a bigger chart as well, because this is quite a small chart. It's kind of basic. And I've plenty. I'm just having a quick look around to see if I can see any pattern that I can reach the chart I can show you, and unfortunately not. So we are now almost all the way around. And again, I'm going above and below. There's no tangling. Again though, if you find halfway back here that you've done them and you reverse them, there's no need to rip back. It's only that this is, not proper. This is the way to manage your kind of floats, is to consistently do it. But in a decorative sock like this that you're enjoying and making it for the festive season, it doesn't have to be that perfect. Actually, nothing really has to be that perfect. Oh, you're welcome, Helen. I hope that made sense. I will show a bigger chart tomorrow night. So this is the first one. So we've just gone around. Knitting. Teaching knitting live is funny, isn't it? It's like a little bit slow. So we've come all the way around Thankfully we have the right number of stitches, and I know that because I am supposed to have a white stitch last, which is I'm very relieved about because that could have gone anyway. So now you will see, if we look at the back of it, you will see all of my strands. So I have my brown strands above and my white strands below. It doesn't make a huge difference which one you pick. The one that goes below makes bigger stitches and they pop a little bit more. But you know what? I would not worry too much about it. It's just to keep them consistent and do the whole same thing throughout. So put my marker back in. And now this is actually really handy because the first of the chart, I would now knit a white and a white, but nobody wants to see me knit this whole chart live. If you do, nobody does. But the handy thing about this is actually this is the same kind of setup for the Latvian braid. So it's in main colour, knit one, in colour 1, knit one, knit one, knit one, knit one, all the way around. So it's actually the same thing that you would do when you're doing the setup for the braid. So that's really useful. So I've now shown you how to use your chart and to do a basic strand of colour work, but also how to do the setup round of your Latvian braid. Will there be any charts available to... Yeah, so this is available to print. It's in the files. This actual one is. And I can do some more charts as well because I actually have lots and lots of festive Christmas charts that people can take and turn into them. And we'll do that a little bit later on as well. I have that planned for Fridays to show you how to put charts into this if you want to knit anything you want pretty much into the sock. So the next thing you do with the Latvian braid is you do round one, which means that you bring your 2 yarns through your work to the front. Now this is slightly different in that you are going to be twisting the yarns the whole way around with the braid. So this is really fun basically. Now this is different so you purl your first stitch. So this time you're going to be purling one in colour 1, purl 1, in colour 2, well, colour 1, main colour, contrast colour 1. You take it underneath and then you purl 1. And I'll show you what that means now. Although when you start, it's underneath anyway. So I purl my first stitch. And then I take my yarn underneath and I purl that stitch. Now, the way I know which colour I'm purling is that you're going to be using the same colour on each stitch the whole way around. And that's one of the really useful parts of the braid as well. So I'm going to purl this stitch. This is very loose, by the way. I want it to be loose because you don't want it to be too tight. So then you can adjust the stitch because it's come a little bit loose because it's where I joined in. Now, you're probably thinking, but you're bringing it across the front. And that's what you're actually doing with the braid. So I'm going to bring the yarn underneath again. So you take your other colour underneath and you purl the stitch. So I now have 2 lines. Bring it down, bring this colour down, purl the next stitch. And I normally put mine over the top of my needle so that I can really easily bring my yarn down, and then I purl the next stitch. And it can feel a bit strange, particularly on if you're using small needles like these, but it's actually, you will see exactly what's happening now in just a second. So I bring my needle down and you can already see the yarn is beginning to twist, and that is a feature of the braid. Don't worry about that. We'll show you what happens with that later. So I have my purl my stitch, bring my yarn up over the needle and then bring this down underneath again, purl my stitch, bring this back over. Just, you're really making sure. So when I put this over the needle, you don't have to put it all the way over it, but it's a good reminder that your white yarn should be underneath it every time. And then you bring it up and then underneath. And this is different to the other one where we saw at the back where we were keeping them at one underneath and one above, and that's what we're doing here. And you can actually beginning to see the start of the braid. And this is one of the only times that you do that kind of work at the front. Is when you're doing a Latvian braid where you're actually carrying your floats at the front of your work to see them actually happening. So I'm going to put this up and I'm going to do a whole round of these. So if anyone has any questions while I'm doing it, let me know if it's not clear enough. So again, I'm taking my yarn underneath and I'm purling my stitch. Then I'm putting it above, pulling myself some yarn because it does get quite twisty. And if you are using the roving yarn, I recommend untwisting it and then rather than leaving it all twist, because it can fray a softer yarn. but it's totally worth the effort as long as you don't overstress the yarn. So I'm going to keep going. So hopefully you can see I'm purling my stitch, my yarn is underneath, putting it over, I'm bringing my other yarn down, underneath, purling my stitch. So I'm going to keep doing this and I'm going to chat away as I do it. So with a Latvian braid and with anything that you're doing with colour work, your gauge or your tension, so that's how the size of your stitches is really important. Because Latvian braids are often used on things like hats, etc., I would err on the side of loose rather than on the side of tight, because they won't have as much stretch in them as other things. And it's the same with any of your floats as well. I always err on the side of loose, although too loose, as you'll see in a little bit some of my stitches here, it's not ideal either. But it's easier to fix loose than it is to fix tight. So you'll see sometimes people will talk about things blocking out. Some levels of tightness cannot be blocked out. So it's always a little bit loose, particularly when you're learning a new technique as well. Give yourself a little bit of time to do it. As well, if this is your first time doing this, maybe don't use your kit yarn. Oh, see, this is very easily done as well, and I've just done it through too much talking. What happened here is that I didn't keep the yarn to the front, and that's actually really important, is that as your yarn twists, it can kind of be more tempting to take it around and leave it at the back. So be careful of that, otherwise you'll see it come over and create a loop over the top of the stitch. So now we're going to go down underneath, keep doing that. And I don't have a here's one I did earlier because I think that this one is worth kind of working through the whole lot. That's why I'm using the really small needles as well, so that I have as few stitches in my circumference as I could possibly have had on a needle. So you keep going, and you can see that it gets a bit tight after a while, so you have to keep moving. And if you are using a softer yarn, be careful not to pull them apart because you don't want to have too much friction running down your yarn as you do this. So I am continuing to go on. And again, you can see that after a while you get into a bit of a rhythm with it. You take one underneath, you swap them over, you take it underneath, you purl, and you can see it twisting away happily behind me as I go. So does anyone have any questions about this, or does this make sense? Is it clear enough, or is there anything else I can... This is definitely knitting live. Keep pulling it. Don't worry, this will all untwist like a magic in the next one. And we're almost there, so I'm just going to finish off the last few stitches. And there's no real, like, when I do this, I tend to do it kind of as I'm doing it now. I don't have, you can hold your yarn in your left hand as well, but I don't tend to for this because I like the way, the twisting, I prefer to have my kind of, just keep pulling the yarn out along. Whereas you could hold it in your left hand, but I'm not a great fan of, there's no real need, depending on what kind of way you knit. So, after the first round, I'm going to show you what this looks like. Let me just all the way through right to the end, and there's a bit of, you can see a little, so I've come all the way around. Now there's been a little bit of debate as to which way you should carry your yarn, under or over, when you do this one. To be honest, I would always just carry it under to keep going. It makes not a huge difference. You could carry it over, but I'm just going to carry it under and purl the first stitch of the next round. But we're going to have a quick look then at what this looks like. So this is my first round of my Latvian braid, and you can see that it's really quite cute. So you have the purl bumps above it, but you also have the actual braided piece. And now we're going to do the second piece of the Latvian braid. And now at this stage you're probably going to be pulling your yarn and cursing it a small bit. because you don't have a lot of space. So make yourself a little bit of space, pull the twist right down along so you have a little bit of space for the next bit. And this is where you reverse what you've been doing. So we have been taking the yarn under. In the next round of the braid, you go over. So instead of going underneath the purl, I go over to purl. So I'm going over, and this is actually much easier to do. Then I'm going to go over and purl. Then I'm going to twist and go over and purl. So you can see that the braid, and this is very loose, but the braid is beginning to take shape. So you go over this time. Now, so I'll do that again. So taking my white yarn over my brown yarn and purling my stitch. Doing it again. And as I do this, my yarn is untwisting, which is one of the really neat things about the Latvian braid, is that by the time I get to the other end, it will have entirely untwisted. I'm going to show you that as well. Now, so in this one, we went under and then we went over. So we have a braid that points to the right. If you want a braid that points to the left, you would go over first and then under. So you can actually do the Latvian braid in two different directions. So something really pretty to do is to do one to the right, one to the left, and then another one to the right. So we keep going over and over the way again. And so give myself a little bit more space, although I'm obviously getting some as I go. And it's I find this one much easier because it's much more natural to kind of put your finger in around over the yarn rather than bringing it underneath, which is a bit more of a movement. Plus your twist is disappearing as you go. So over, purl, down, over, purl. Now, does anyone have, you can put like, if you want to add a Latvian braid to something, as I was saying about the gauge, you just need to make sure that it doesn't make anything too tight or anything. So it's a really nice addition to hats, to scarf edges, to cuffs of sweaters. You'll very frequently see it on Latvian mittens, obviously, because it is a Latvian technique. And it's really, really pretty when you see lovely Latvian mittens. If you are interested in Latvian mittens, there's a company called Hobby Wool who do lovely Latvian mittens. The lovely lady's name escapes me, but she's written a book called Knit Like a Latvian, and her mitten book is really good, and she does a Latvian braid in that as well. It's a great, there's obviously there's a big tradition of stranded colourwork knitting in Latvia and in the Baltic states. So I am now just slitting along, purling away, and hopefully this is making sense. I'm trying not to block the camera because I'm so used to knitting now. I'm like, I'll just knit my own style. So keep purling. And it feels a little bit alien to do all this purling as well. It might feel a bit strange to people because you don't normally do so much purl in the round. But it's worth it. And now we are back to the start of my round, and we can now show you Latvian braid. And that is your Latvian braid. This is a little bit loose because I'm demonstrating it and I want to keep my stitches so that you can see them, but you can see how pretty that is and how it goes in the right hand direction. So do you so once you finish the braid, so if I was going to work the braid and I wasn't going to do the chart, I would, so if I was say I was going to do the leg pattern. Actually, that's a great question, Helen. So if I was going to knit a plain leg, I would just cut either the brown or the white, which one I wasn't going to continue on, and I would keep going. But if I was going to do this chart, what I would do is I would knit my 4 rounds. So say I did my 4 rounds of white. I would just carry my yarn down the back of my work then. So if I did 4 rounds now, so say I pretend I'm coming the other way. So say I've done my 4 rounds that I was knitting here, I would just carry this yarn very loosely along the back and then start knitting with that when I bring it to the chart. So a lot of the time I wouldn't cut my yarn. I never cut my yarn if I don't have to. would be something I would say, is that I would just keep knitting with it. I would do my rows and then I would come to my chart and I would just start away with the brown yarn, then 4 rows on. So I wouldn't cut it if I don't have to. So that was for this piece. So if I did my 4 rounds and then added my M1 back in, I wouldn't cut them between those. I then work my chart and then I would cut out colour 1 because I'm going to do 28 rounds. And you don't want to carry yarn for, well, you could carry yarn for 28 rounds of stocking stitch, but I just wouldn't. Now I'm not entirely sure. Oh, it has actually just about untangled. I still have one little tiny twist. That's where I took the yarn underneath when I came around, but you see it is all untwisted. So that is the Latvian braid. Now something we're going to look at, and we're not going to look at it tonight because I am I'm going to knit on with this so I can put the heel onto it. But if I had a little bit of white thread here, I would hide this slightly ugly bump that you get. So your braid starts here and then it goes around and it kind of is a spiral, but I'm going to show you how to make that a little bit more pretty. A little bit more pretty. So how do I carry the yarn? So if I'm carrying yarn behind, I'm actually literally just carrying it. So say for example, do I have something I can show you? No, I don't. So if I was just, say I had done 3 rounds, I would take the yarn, I wouldn't even twist them every row. I would just bring the yarn behind because it's a decorative sock. Actually, let me show you. I think I have it in this one. I should be able to show you. Yes. So what you'll see here is that I finished the braid. I did my 4 rounds and I literally just carried the yarn along the back. So when I say carry, I just mean, yes, don't cut. Just bring it along the back of the work, as if I were you just start the next row with it, leaving enough space. It's a bit like a strand. So as I strand my colour work, I can strand it over rows as well as stitches. So you'll see I put it there. And actually another interesting point as well is that in a colour work chart where you have kind of 1 or 2 rows as well, or rounds, sorry, you would just carry the yarn as well. So you're never really cutting it between rounds. You're just carrying it along the back. And it's funny, when you ask me, carrying is interesting. I literally just move it. I take it from the last stitch and knit the next stitch in that colour that I require it to. And when I say that's what it means to carry a yarn, is to just not cut it, but to just bring it along the back. So yeah, that's how you just carry your yarn along the back. So in the same way that you would strand it along my stitches behind, you can strand it behind your rows as well. So that is, oh yes, something I was going to show you as well. Chris, I think you had a question about this. So for people who are finding, let me put that over there. For anybody who's finding that when they're casting on to the short circular needle and you're finding that you just you're not making it around, it's because your cast on is a little bit tight, and that's really common. So let me just do a slip knot like we did last night. And I'm going to show you how to loosen up a cast on if you're finding that it's a bit too tight for you. So I've now put on my slip knot. And as we did last night, I slide in my needle. I take my yarn around and then I bring it out and I pop it on. Now, if I'm very tight, don't pull it through. Just don't make it don't pull it like that too much. That's what's making it tight. Leave it a little bit looser so that you have a little bit more space, and then make your next stitch. And again, don't bring it back too far. And what that does is it gives you this kind of space here, which is what creates the distance between your stitches. So you can go in, pull it through, and leave it a little bit loose. And what that does is it stops your stitches being too tight in your cast on. And it's one of the reasons actually that we don't use this cast on for leg socks, worn socks, is because it can be a bit tight. So let me show you the difference. So that's my 5 stitches not cast on tightly. Whereas if I cast on 5 stitches super tightly, like I do here, although the big needle still makes them a little bit loose, you will see that those 4 stitches and those 4 stitches are a totally different size on the needle. So if you are finding that your stitches are a bit tight, it's because you're bunching them up too much and you're pulling the stitch too tight over the needle. Give yourself a little bit of space between them so that when you put them on the needle, don't pull them right in tight. And that means your stitches are going to be slightly looser, and it means that they're going to go around the 60 centimeter needle a little bit better. So hopefully that's useful. And if anyone has any questions about anything else, just let me know and then I can cover them in the following evening. Then I'm going to swap over and I will see you back in a second. Well, that's it, a Latvian braid. So that is how you do the basic stranded colour work. So taking the yarn behind the work, one above, one below, and that's with knit stitches. And actually something I didn't say is when you're looking at a chart, it is most often done in stocking stitch. I very rarely see charts that are worked, like colour work charts that are worked in anything else except stocking stitch. There are some, but not that many. And that's the very basics of it. Like I have a whole, like in knit school, we have a whole class on colour work and stranded colour work because you could do it with one hand, two hands, left hands, lots of things with colour work. But that's just to kind of get you the basics so that if you are knitting the like slightly fancier version of the sock, you're ready to go. And then with the braid, obviously you bring the yarn through and you're going to be purling. So that's hopefully very useful. I'm glad how that's good. I'm so glad that's been helpful. So yes, tomorrow night then is the heel, and this is probably one piece that's going to take a bit like tonight. I'm going to have a bit more of it knit in advance, but I wanted to show you the whole braid because it's kind of a little bit magical. I love it. But I'm going to show you we're going to show you how to know where to put your heel, how to count out your stitches for it. We're then going to show you how to do kind of the first couple of rows of short rows, and then I'm going to skip forward and show you how you know when you've finished the first piece of the heel, you know, those unworked stitches and what that looks like. And then I'm going to cover how to do a pickup of a double wrapped stitch, how to double wrap a stitch, and then how to pick one up, because that can be a little bit daunting. And that's what we're going to cover tomorrow night. And then we'll let you finish your heels and move on, and the feet and everything. Once you've turned your heel, socks are just knitting. And even heel turning is just knitting. So that's it. Oh, let me see. Do you knit the first stitch of the second twisted round under to avoid the jog? You can knit it from above. I don't think it makes a huge difference. I'm actually going to show you how to use a Swiss darn to avoid it. Because it's the Swiss darn hides it entirely. So you overstitch it, Victoria. So yeah, I'm going to show you how to do kind of a real cheat method. So yes. Yes, and I think that's it, everybody. Thank you so very much. Again, if you've more questions, just pop them in and I will answer them kind of throughout today, tomorrow, or I'll cover them in the video if it needs a little bit of a tutorial tomorrow evening. So have a lovely evening. Happy sock knitting. If you are following along and knitting along, do get to your heel for tomorrow. And that would be quite awesome. So take care, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for joining me live, and I will see you all tomorrow evening.